Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. I'm Patricio Dieck. I am a senior economics and finance student. Just making sure you guys can see the presentation. Okay. I am a senior economics and finance student here at UT, obviously. I'm graduating here in a week. And Aaron Pankos is my advisor, who's been extremely generous with his time and gracious. So I could not be thankful enough for him. The title of the paper is called Measuring Credit on Household Economy, a case study from Mexico. And I will get into it here. Let's go right into it. So the motivation, why did I write this paper? So I'm from Mexico, I'm from Monterrey, Mexico. I'm from, about 8 hours south of the border, and I live here in Austin. So every time we travel from Austin to Mexico, there is this massive discrepancy in wealth and financial and economic well-being. Really, you look at the roads, you look at the houses. As soon as you cross the border in Rio Grande, you just see this massive disparity. And theoretically, that shouldn't be the case because the people are the same, the land mass is the same. So the question becomes, why is this? And this paper sets out to basically answer that question. One of the theories that you could bring up about this difference is, well, maybe is it that America is just richer because they're more keeping up with the Joneses. Some of the literature says maybe there's a Protestant work ethic. People in Mexico are largely Catholic, and people in America are largely Protestant. Or is it just access to credit? And this is the main question that the paper asks: is credit, does financial development, i.e., credit, lead to economic development? And on top of that, the paper also asks the question: how does this percolate through the economy, given your education, your gender, your marital status, your age, and all the like? But we're going to focus on education, gender, and marital status more specifically. So what is it that we do? We grab the employment census that Mexico conducts every year, called ENE, and we put a credit supply shock, or just a massive increase in credit. And we see how that affects the economy between people that had this credit supply shock and people that didn't have this credit supply shock. Again, we examine this by gender, education, marriage status, and the like. And then through this paper, we do a little bit more econometric work with our outcome variables. Okay, so that is the main gist of the paper. What is it that we find? We find that access to informal credit is significant to informal business creation, and it also increases income. So if you have more credit, you effectively do become wealthier. You do have more likelihood of starting an informal business. Formal business is positively correlated with education. So the more educated you are, the more likely you are to create a formal business. But it's actually negatively correlated with informal businesses. This is actually a very interesting finding, and we won't have time to cover this, but it's in the paper. Another finding is that women obviously report lesser incomes, and obviously because Mexico just has a lot more stay-at-home mothers, and there's a lot of zeros for the income observations. This is also another crucial observation that we will dig in deeper into the presentation. And then at the end, after that, we will talk about the implications of these things, especially observing the income changes and count data in general. We'll get into Poisson regressions. So literature review, we don't have much time to get into this. The main contributors are Brun and Love, which gave us the data for the credit shock, the credit supply shock, and did a paper on this event of increase of credit supply, which we'll talk about in a second. They did research on this. They're one of the main influences of the paper. Also, Professor Jonathan Cohn, who teaches finance here at UT, gave us guidance with the Poisson regression aspect of this, which we'll talk here in a second. So where did we get our data? So we talked about the employment survey, which is the census for employment, which gives us those variables listed there: income, state, municipality, and all the like. And then for the bank opening data, which will serve as our exogenous credit supply shock, is from the National Banking and Securities Commission. We merged these two data sets. Specifically on this credit supply shock, it is a bank, a microfinancing institution that opened 800 bank branches all at the same time in the fourth quarter of 2002. So this gives us this massive supply in credit, and we can look how that affected people throughout municipalities. So the bank is called Banco Azteca, and it opened 800 parent stores. So that is basically what we're going to be measuring. Once Banco Azteca opens, what are the outcomes that happen? Okay, does people income increase? Does their business formation increase? We'll get to that here in a second. So the methodology and the regressions. Here is our equation. If you're a student and you're not really that into equations, just look at that Azteca variable. That is a dummy variable that says, was after the fourth quarter of 2002, did Azteca show up in your municipality? Yes or no? And if it did, what is the effect of that? So what is the effect of that is our delta, and Y is our dependent variable on this presence. Y is business creation, formal or informal, or it's also a measure of income. So basically, once Azteca shows up, if Azteca did show up, did your income increase? If Azteca showed up, did your business creation increase? If you're looking at those A's right there, those are just trending, trending municipality fixed effects, time on municipality fixed effects. That C is just our control variables, which is education, gender, marriage status, which we'll talk about here later in the paper. And that epsilon is just our error term. We have 101.5 million respondents, 4.7 million observations. So it's a very robust data set that Brunello gave us. So up next is the tables, and we're going to look at the results of when Azteca opens up in your municipality, what happens? Does your credit increase? Does your business formation increase? This is what we'll show. So here it is. Basically, if we look at column 1, when Azteca is present, we see a 0.5 increase in informal business ownership, which is actually quite substantial because in our data set, there's about 8.9% informal business ownership. Once Azteca shows up, there's a 0.5% increase from 8.9% to 9.4%. That's very substantial. And that is because it's a microfinancing institution that serves mostly undocumented borrowers. So we see a substantial increase in informal business ownership. Formal business ownership, there's a change. It's not statistically significant. Why? Because formal institutions can get institutional credit. That doesn't affect. So yes, informal business ownership is affected. Formal business ownership is not affected. And here, more importantly, we see that income in the third column increases by 7%. This is actually quite substantial. And this is what we're going to be the focus of the paper. This 7% increase. So we just see that we measure income as a log increase, and this is a percentage increase. A quick little thing on refresher of logs. If we look at a log function, it just basically measures rates of change. So basically, when Azteca shows up, how much does your income change? This is a standard way of measuring count data in economics. And if we remember from our algebra class, we see that log functions are undefined at 0. So if you have observations that have 0, it gets a little bit crazy. But this is the standard, the standard to do in the economics profession. So we're going to move on to the credit shock on. So we're going to, now that we have here income, and that is monthly income. We're going to measure your increase of income once Azteca shows up monthly. We're going to measure it yearly, and we're going to measure it in thousands of pesos. Theoretically, this shouldn't really change. If your income increases 7% monthly, it should also increase 7% yearly. What is it that we find? Here we do on column 1 is monthly income, column 2 is yearly income, and column 3 is income in thousands of pesos. We look at the coefficients and we see a massive difference between each coefficient. We see that if you measure income increase in monthly, that's 7%, as we established before. It is almost 10% if you do yearly. And if you do it in thousands of pesos, it's not even 1%. This is extremely significant because this basically says that these results are not robust. And most people in the economics profession with count variables use this method. And we see here that they're not consistent. Furthermore, one of the main contributions of this paper is our solution to this problem. We find that Poisson regressions are not undefined at 0 and do not depend on how many observations that have a 0 value. So basically, we find that income is actually only increased by about 3% when Azteca shows up. Up next, we're going to see this effect again. We're going to run these different scales of log income transformations. on the effect that education has on your income. This is a big kind of ugly table, but basically we see that the more education you have, we measure the different levels of income. Again, we see discrepancies. Let's look at a table or a graph and make it a little bit clearer. Here we see your monthly income or your income dependent on the scale of the log transformation. In theory, these four graphs should look the same. These three different graphs should look the same as a Poisson regression. They don't. And that is because they're dependent on the log transformations that we use. This is again very significant because most papers in the economics profession use log 1 plus. And this graph shows that there's massive variance. For example, look at if you have a log income of monthly log income. If you look at the university in this second graph, that is about a 3.3 log point increase in your income if you go to university, which basically equates to 13 times your income is increased. That is not reasonable, and we look to the Poisson regression to fix this very problem. Another example of this is if you're a female, how does that affect your income? We look at these coefficients and we again see these massive log point variance that is just not acceptable and fails to produce robust results. Again, we use Poisson regression to fix these problems, and we can kind of visualize this in a graph that shows that basically each one of those three graphs should look the same. These four coefficients should be the same. These four coefficients should be the same. These four coefficients should be the same. We basically find that this variance in results is caused by how many zeros there are in the data. And the important observation of these zeros is that the log function is undefined at zero. So if you have a lot of zeros in your data, if your data is right skewing, then it destroys your results. So this is very important, and this is the main contribution of the paper. As an extension of this, we basically do a two-stage least squares regression. Now we change the question a little bit more. We basically ask, how much does owning an informal business increase your income? Now that we established that your income is increased by STATA, how much does, and also your informal business likelihood, your likelihood to own an informal business is increased by STATA. Let's ask the question, how much does owning an informal business increase your income? To do this, we do a two-stage least squares regression, which basically predicts the business formation, how much business formation happens from STATA, which we established previously. And then on top of that, from this predicted business formation, how much is your income increased? Basically, we put this as STATA as an instrumental variable or just like as a predictor to add exogeneity to the results and make them more robust. However, again, we find that the scale of the log income really affects the results. We see 10 log points, 14 log points. I mean, this is a very large difference. 14 log points is like a multiple of like 20,000 or something like that. And we use Poisson regression to fix for this discrepancy. And basically we can see this graphically here with our comparison between OLS and IV. Again, those two graphs should look the same no matter what your scale of log transformation is, but they don't. So as a conclusion, wrapping up this presentation, is what did we learn? We find that education increases formal business creation, but not informal business creation. That is in the paper. We find that commonly used log transformations are just not effective to get outcome variables. They change the results and basically destroy robustness. Another finding of this paper is that the reduction of financial frictions, which answers the first question that we asked, does increase economic development. The less financial frictions there are, the more economic development there will be. And that bank's presence in the municipality is also correlated to incomes and informal business formation. As a closing thought, I'd like to thank Aaron Pankos for being my advisor. He was an incredible mentor and just gave me so many opportunities to learn and to fail and to learn from those failures. So thank you very much. We have some time for questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Patricio, we have one comment in the chat that I'll let you read regarding how you can calculate. And then there's also a question How do you distinguish between formal and informal businesses? So I'll let you answer that first, and then there's a second part to that.
Yeah, so we distinguish between formal and informal businesses. Basically, informal businesses are businesses that do not report to the taxing authority in Mexico, which is or Social Security. So the workers are basically not paying taxes; they're not registered with the government. Do we expect more measurement error with informal data? Yes, we do expect more measurement error. However, these surveys are not purely, some of these surveys are ran so also kind of informally. They go around and survey different, entities or whatever. But yes, we would expect more measurement error with informal data. And Jason, I appreciate that comment. I will look into that. Any more questions?
I had one, Patricio. I was just wondering whether you dug in at all in your thesis, or if you didn't, if you thought about possibly looking whether the credit supply shock had different effects on different demographic subgroups. It seems like, right, if I understand what the Azteca opening was, it was extending sort of micro credit to sort of previously unbanked individuals. So it seems like you might think the effect of that would be a lot larger for, individuals with demographic characteristics that suggest that they were likely to be unbanked.
Right, and that is exactly what happened. I mean, the bank basically opened up in places that they basically, their value proposition was that they got rid of documentation requirements. So basically, people that didn't have documentation could just get these like microfinancing loans. And those were the ones that usually tend to be poor people, informal workers, and those were the ones that were able to get that extended credit.
But does it? Yeah. So my question is, does it show up? I might have just misunderstood, but does it show up in the data, like in the regression analyses that you do, that say you find bigger effects on income for the subpopulation that seems like it would have been affected by this policy?
Yes, we actually went through that, and I can't remember the exact number. So I'm purely talking from my intuition here, but I remember that there was at one point where like, oh, this affected mostly lower income people, But I'd have to run the regressions to make, exactly measure how much that affected given your demographic of income.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Any other questions? Sweet. I think that's how good the presentation was. I just answered all the questions that you guys had. So thank you. Again, I'd like to thank Aaron for his mentorship and his help. I mean, I could not have done any of this without his help. So thank you again, Aaron. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.